All right, guys, let's talk about evictions for a minute. So if you're doing some landlording, doing some investing in real estate, something that you might come across sooner or later is that you're going to have a tenant or an occupant in a home that you need to leave and they just don't. Now, before you ever get to this point, the number one way to avoid ending up in an eviction situation is with good tenant screening. So there's plenty on the internet about how to screen a good tenant, but you need to verify their income, that it's appropriate for the unit that they're renting. You need to check their references, you need to check their credit, you need to check their criminal, and hopefully if you do all that right, you'll have a pretty good tenant. But that's not always the case. Sometimes something goes wrong in someone's world, and even after all your due diligence, you end up with a tenant after a while that's not working out. Sometimes you buy a property, you buy a fourplex, it may already have 3 or 4 tenants in there that you didn't get to pick, so you didn't get to screen. Maybe the person selling the property didn't tell you, how great of tenants they've been. And then in today's case, we've got the situation where I bought a property that already had known squatters in and on all over this property. It's a several acre property with a small house, and there are several occupants who haven't been paying the bill there for years, and I bought it as is with the occupants included. Now, of course, I got a good deal on that property, which will be the subject of a different video, and this puppy scene is just because they're adorable. But today we're just going to be talking about the eviction process. So the first step is you have to give them a formal notice that you want them to leave the property. This is called a notice to quit, and there's different variations depending on why you're asking them to leave. Like if you just want your property back, you want to give them 30 days notice, maybe you want to move back into it or renovate it. That's one type. If they're not paying rent or breaking the lease in another way, there's different reasons why you can ask a tenant to leave, and those reasons dictate the amount of time you have to get them. If you're just terminating their lease for no fault of theirs, you just want your property back, you have to give them at least 30 days notice here in Alaska. And if it's for violating the lease for some reason, like not paying of rent, it might be 7 or 10 days. It just depends on why you're asking them to leave. And so if it's for a violation like non-payment of rent, they do have that period of time. If you give them 7 days to leave or pay, they of course can pay and cure that, and then they're fine. But if it's 30-day notice, you're just telling them that they need to leave anyways. What I usually do in those situations, if I want my property back to renovate, for instance, I got this fourplex that's had a tenant in it since I bought it, and that one unit has never been renovated, even though everything needed it. I ended up giving him 60-day notice so that he could, have plenty of time, because it wasn't anything he did. I just needed to get that renovated so I could move it up to market rent and have the property, in a safer, nicer condition. But there are those minimums there that you have to give them to cure if it's something that they need to fix, like the rent for the 7 days. What happens most of the time is that they'll either get that cured or they'll start to move out and whatnot. But if they don't move out and and they don't fix the problem, you can't go physically move them. You can't go change the locks here in Alaska and in most places, because they don't want physical altercations. They want to make sure that there's due process for the tenants and everything. So you can't go physically remove them. You have to go to court and sue them to get out. They will be responsible for all these costs, and hopefully they've got the money to pay that. But if you got to hire a lawyer or just do it yourself and go to court to get them out, they are going to end up responsible for those costs. So you take your paperwork to the court, your notice to quit and all that, and you'll get a court date depending on how busy they are. It can be a little while, but they try to keep these. They understand that that this is costing people money, so they try to get you in within a week or two if you're lucky, and they'll set a court date. So you end up showing up to the court, and if they show up also, if they don't show up, you'll probably get a default judgment, usually, if you've done your paperwork right and shown that you've given them proper notice. If they do show up, the judge will hear out both sides. You'll say why that you've given the proper notice and done the proper legal steps, and if they have anything to say, they'll say that, and then the judge will make a decision. Generally, if you've done it right, then you'll get the judgment for possession. That means that you're going to get the property back, and the judge will ask you and the other side what you think is reasonable for time to leave, and that might be it's usually 7 to 10 days for them to move out, but if the occupant is rude and snide and calls the judge names, sometimes they'll give them like an hour. And what that means is that when that time is up, then you get a writ of assistance, and that is basically a court order that allows and directs the appropriate law enforcement to physically go remove them. So even after you've been to court, you still can't just show up with the crew and eject these folks. They have to be removed by the appropriate law enforcement, which in our area is generally the Alaska State Troopers, and they will show up and they will trespass anybody that's on the property. And then at that point, if they come back, you can just call any of the troopers, and they'll show up and physically remove them again. And so there's some pros and cons to this system. The pros is that people aren't going to get evicted and lose their home without due process. They're going to get their chance to say, oh well, we did pay, here's my receipts, and they can state their case. And if they're if they've got a claim for discrimination, or they got proof that they did pay, or whatever their complaint is. During COVID, there was COVID restrictions, so they can show up and plead their case. And I would imagine that occasionally the tenant would win if the landlord didn't do their job right there. So that's the good thing, is that it does help protect the tenants. From the landlord's perspective, if you've got a squatter, or you have somebody that's not in there paying, you're losing a lot of money, and in a lot of cases they're in there actually damaging the property while you're going. So you're evicting them for damaging the property anyways sometimes, and then they're still living in the property, still damaging it, leaving garbage behind. I don't know how many hundreds of tons of garbage I've hauled off from properties I've bought, order houses, foreclosures, and estates. But all that costs money, and it's the opportunity cost that you're waiting for the slow wheels of justice to turn, while these folks are literally living in your house and damaging it and not paying. They might not be paying the utility bill, they're racking up the garbage. It can be frustrating and very expensive. So that's the pros and cons of it, is that we're making sure it's done right, but at the same time it's costing the landlord money. Again, theoretically, all these damages can be collected, but if you bought a property with some squatters or whatnot, and which is the case of what I'm going through today about this property, it's got a bunch of squatters and a bunch of debris. We've already cleaned up 120 yards of debris. That's three 40-yard dumpsters so far. And as we've been going through this process for months now, they keep hauling more stuff in, and I don't know where it's coming from, but we're having another 40-yard dumpster delivered today, and sitting around waiting for the troopers to call to see if we can go remove them. If not, it'll end up being next week if they're not available today, because obviously emergency responders have emergencies and stuff. So what is the whole timeline? It's going to vary depending on why you're evicting them, but I'll give you this example of the one that I bought. I bought it at the end of January, and it was about a week later that I went and gave them formal notice and served them and gave them 30 days to get out. I gave them 30 days because since I bought the property with them in it, there was no lease in place, so it wasn't like, oh, you didn't pay rent. I mean, they hadn't paid for years and years, but I didn't have a lease with them, so I couldn't give them a 7-day. So I gave them a 30 days that I bought the property. I need you to leave within 30 days. I knew they weren't going anywhere. So when the 30 days came and went, then I had to go file at the court. So that was early February to early March. When we filed the paperwork at the court, they set the date for towards the end of March. So we went to court, did that. That was lots of fun. Got called lots of names. So did the judge, and I was surprised the judge gave him, the 7 to 10 days. I think she gave him 9 days, which I was surprised after how they treated her. But there was multiple people staying there, and not all of them were belligerent, and so she wanted to make sure that people had time to get out. So they gave him a writ of assistance, gave me a writ of assistance for the 7th, I think, of April. Well, she didn't sign it. She just said that she'd give it to me, or it wasn't delivered. I'm not sure exactly what the deal is, but I didn't get that until about a week ago, which was about 10 or 12 days after the writ was effective. So it took them like 3 total weeks to get me the writ of assistance. Then you have to go pay the troopers $65 and get on their list, and they're very busy too. So it's a specific branch of the troopers that will perform these writ of assistance, and they have obviously other cases, and they've got other duties at the courthouse too. It's the judicial services branch of the troopers, and they've got jobs and they're busy. So now I'm waiting for them and their schedule, and today is the 25th, I think, and hopefully they'll be able to get to it today. The trooper spoke to me yesterday and said that if they're not too busy today, they'll call me. So I've got a whole crew with the excavator and the dumpsters, everything's on standby waiting, and hopefully they'll be able to get to it. But today is April 25th, and I bought the thing at the end of January, gave them the month's notice and been through all the process. So basically 3 months to get them out, which isn't always the case, but it can be. But it can be less than a month too, depending on the circumstances. So anyways, that's where we are. I'm gonna get some footage later, hopefully today, of kind of the process, and it's not going to be a very fun scene. There's going to be I believe there's going to be some belligerence from some of the squatters. There's definitely drugs involved. If you're living in Alaska under a tarp on a property, there's some substance issues there, I would imagine. And hopefully we can get this property cleaned up, all the junk and cars hauled off and all that, and we'll see how that goes.